To come along and speak tonight. So I'm very passionate about the subject of nutrition because that's my day job when I'm not rushing in and out here of first thing in the morning. So I work at the Rowett Institute, which is now based at Forster Hill at the hospital, and we've been part of the University of Aberdeen for about 10 years. So I lead up a team looking at appetite across the life course. So and you guys chose the topic for tonight, which is eating as a form of behaviour, why we eat what we eat, and more importantly, how can we change it. So a few notes. I've given you a freebie recipe book on plant protein. So I've got some more here. If you're interested in whole grains and fibre, please feel free to come and help yourselves. I've got some leaflets, I've got lots of studies running, 10 at the moment. So I've just taken 2 random studies. If you're interested in finding out about what's going on at the Rowett in terms of its nutrition research, pick up a leaflet. I know I speak quite quickly. I'm going to cover quite a lot of ground tonight. If you're interested in the PowerPoint, please email me and I'll send it to you if you've got any questions. Last but not least, why have I got food in front of me? Well, I always think if I'm speaking about food, it's kind of weird not to have food. So I've taken some research diets, an example of what is a big breakfast and what is a small breakfast, because that's one of the things that I'm interested in just now, which is timing of eating. So it's not just what you eat, but when you eat that's important. So the 4 topics that I really want to cover this evening is to tell you a little bit about eating as a form of behaviour, how do we change behaviour, 2 techniques that we can use to do that, and then moving into some facts about our physiology and psychology. So the first question is, why do we eat what we eat? So you can tell me, why do you eat? There's no right or wrong answer, just to chuck some ideas at me. Because you enjoy it, yeah. For pleasure, definitely. Boredom, yeah, so emotions. Energy, to provide fuel, yeah, for movement. Comfort, yeah, another emotional sort of construct, okay. So eating is necessary, okay, it's necessary for survival. We tend to need to do it every day, but in some circumstances we overeat, which leads to obesity. So the answer to the question, why do we eat, seems obvious: to obtain energy, that's what Jay said, and to support our everyday needs. But there obviously are many other reasons too. Other ones that I've been interested in, for example, is stress. This is the guidance that we're given, which is the Eat Well guide, which I don't find very useful. It's in the form of a plate, and these are in food groups. Of course, we don't eat food groups, we eat actual food, so it can be quite difficult to interpret this. But of course, our daily choices in terms of the food that we eat is governed very much by other factors, external factors like how much time we have, if we're in a rush, where we are, what food is available, etc. So one of the topics here is stress. So I want to take a quick poll, right? So how do you respond when you feel stressed? Stand up if you eat more when you feel stressed. Okay. Again, there's no right or wrong, so that's fine. Okay. Stand up if you eat less. Well, that'd be me, definitely. Okay. And stand up if you just eat the same because it doesn't impact. Usually 1 or 2. Okay, that's really interesting. What we found in the research that we did, and we used firemen, ambulance responders and prison officers that were working shifts, was that, and this has been repeatedly shown, that 40% of people everybody will usually change their eating habits, with 40% overeating and 40% undereating, and actually 20% say that they don't change their eating habits. And shift workers are at greater risk of health issues, and we don't have any health recommendations for them with regards to eating, not yet anyway. So food choice is very complex. There are lots of biological reasons governing what we choose to eat, economic reasons, there's lots of physical determinants, social determinants, psychological determinants, and of course our attitudes and sort of culture towards eating and food. So I want to introduce eating as a form of behaviour, and it has a major influence on our health and well-being. Eating as a form of behaviour, therefore, is learned, just like physical activity is learned. Okay? So the study of human eating behaviour is carried out by researchers and across different disciplines, and of course eating fulfills this biological need. This is an interesting definition of eating behaviour. It's a behavioural response or sequences associating with eating, including modes of feeding, rhythmic patterns and time interval. And that sounds really complex, so I've put in my own comment here. We actually consume food and drink, so we can think of it in that way as well. So this is one of the ways that we learn about eating, right? And what this shows here is that the food, any given food, in an environment, will give us cues: the smell, taste, texture, and once we consume that food, it will have what we call post-ingestive consequences. And if that's a positive feeling, so you feel uplifted because you get a quick burst of glucose and energy, and you feel better after eating, then you get a positive association with that food and how you feel. So that's why many people will tell me, oh, I've got a chocolate addiction, and I'm like, don't think you do, but you've learned to associate, if you eat chocolate, you'll get a bit of a pick-me-up. Just like me, my coffee, I really like coffee, and I know that I'll get a quick buzz out of it. But you can have negative associations as well. So if you eat something and then sick, then that will have a negative association. So often when you've got food poisoning or whatever, you think, what was the last thing I ate? For me, whether it was an egg sandwich, and then that's put you off eggs for a period of time. Okay, so you can learn to associate food with positive or negative. And one of the other questions that I relate to why do we eat, which I think is equally as important, is why do we stop eating then? When we're sitting down at a meal, why do we put down our knife and fork? You guys can maybe give me some more ideas. Feeling fullness, but how do you feel? What is that feeling? It's interesting because we use that name, fullness and hunger, but these are just constructs. They're just feelings, a bit like habit, yes. So what happens there is you learn to associate, okay, it's lunchtime, so I've got this period of time until maybe evening, which is maybe fixed if we're working. So I know if I eat this amount, then I will not feel hungry for this period of time. But if I overeat, I'm going to feel uncomfortable. So coming back to Val's comments about feeling full, that comes from the stomach. You kind of get stretch receptors, so you get sensations coming from the stomach into the brain. So the main reason is because the feeling of fullness, which is the inverse to hunger. Also that if I gave you a box of chocolates and said, okay, you can have as many as you want, and maybe you'd have 1, 2, 3, 4, but the reward value under normal eating circumstances would decline as you ate more and more and more. Okay. Whereas if I took a buffet, a huge buffet, you would tend to say, oh, a little bit of this, a little bit of that, and then the cheese and biscuits come out, and then after 8 minutes, and you think, oh yes, well, so taste is obviously a huge cue for stopping eating, and then sometimes initiating eating again. But the sensory reasons to stop eating are via the brain signals, particularly from the gut into the brain. So this is a bit more sciencey. This is called the satiety cascade, and this is something I'm passionate about because I've applied this very successfully to influence taking my science from the science base to the supermarket shelf. And what we say is that there's a cascade of satiety, a cascade in a way, I'll take this next slide, that we get cues from the sensory characteristics of food. Does it smell nice? Does it look nice? Is it the correct temperature? There are cognitive associations about food, whether you perceive that to be a luxury food or a staple food. The post-ingestive consequences in terms of gastric distensions, the stretch receptors, and the release of hormones that signal into the brain, cross the blood-brain barrier and tell us to go into the centre of the brain. And then the post-absorptive mechanisms that result from action of glucose, fats and amino acids. So this can be within a meal, so this can happen a very short period of time within 10, 15, 30 minutes, and then longer in the intermeal period reflecting satiety and satiation, and that's what stops you from taking your next meal. So this is some of the signs that I took to develop the Balance for You range for Marks and Spencer. So it's been called numerous things, but it was based on my science, which is that high protein diets are more satiating, have a better ability to keep you full compared to low protein diets, and particularly in the presence of fibre to protect gut health. Okay, so I want to stop here, and this is a quote especially for Mike, since it's his birthday, because I know that Mike likes quotes. I don't know if you've seen that one before, but the essence of this is that he who loves to practice without the theories, like the sailor who boards ship without a rudder and compass and never knows where he may cast. So what I wanted to do was then kind of have, a dozen slides and a little bit more science so that I can kind of back up some of the things that I've said with you. So this is sort of the lecture bit, but let's have some fun first. Right, here is a plate of biscuits. Okay, so what I want you to do is stand up and walk to the my left-hand side of the gym. So the left-hand side of the red carpet if you would like to eat those cookies, and then stand at the right-hand side if you wouldn't want to eat those cookies. Now, if I took in a nice plate of... Yes, right now. Or even one, if you'd be tempted... Yes, eating, not eating. Okay, that's really interesting, because we have two parts of the brain that will govern the decisions that we make. Let's sit down again. Let's reflect why. Okay, so often we have a conflict, and where this is going to fit in is establishing habits, okay? So these dual processes in the brain are often competing, okay? So you might want to say, no, I want to stick to diet. I don't know if that kind of reflects with what the people at this side of the room were thinking, that maybe they want to have a healthy week this week and they weren't going to be tempted by biscuits. Maybe they just didn't like biscuits. Maybe if I put up a picture of Pringles, they might have been more tempted. Okay, and then there's the other side that might say, yes, I've just finished one of my workouts, I'm flipping starving, Alex, I need a quick burst of sugar because I'm tired, or often what I hear is because I deserve this. So that's interesting. So eating, is it a deliberate action then? Therefore, if we have these competing sort of analogies in the brain, so we can have attitudes and actions that will deliver towards a short-term goal, which is immediate reward and impulsive. So that's when you maybe hadn't planned to eat something, but you see it and think, oh, that looks nice, I'll have a quick bite of that. Or indeed, you have the longer-term goals which override this impulse, which is reflective processes, which is much more reasoned, goal-orientated, and you need to have some degree of self-control, or what health psychologists would call executive function. Whereas what you really want to do is to develop the habit-based processes here in order to support your longer-term goals. So I've mentioned the word habit a couple of times there. So habit, so actions that have come to be automatically triggered by situational cues, okay? So they can be learned through context-dependent repetition. That's what I've said about eating as a form of behaviour that is learned. They can be cue-dependent, like you go to cinema, what do you buy? Popcorn. Goodness knows why, but anyway, it's automatic. So you go into the cinema and you automatically take your popcorn. Oh, we are going to cinema, therefore we take sweeties, or we have hot dogs, whatever. May be initiated without awareness and requires little or no effort. So in that context, we are creatures of habit, and we are often unwilling to change our food preferences, even though we know it's good for us. And we seem to be searching for a quick fix, and for health. We want to live the longest we can with optimal fitness, health and well-being, but often the food choices and the lifestyle that we have don't really support those goals. So that is a dichotomy there, that we want to be healthy, feel good, but we don't want to change our habits, and we think that maybe eating superfoods like, I don't know, blueberries 3 times a week is going to help us live longer. So there's some interesting concepts in there, and I thought it was really interesting that the word diet comes from the Greek word diatia, meaning a way of life, a mode of living. So when we think about, oh, I'm on a diet, you think, oh, it's restrictive, it's a sort of cottage cheese, lettuce, leaf sandwich, but actually diet should be a way to support your healthy body and healthy mind. So we should think of it in that way. So I want to think about these two systems, conflicting systems that we have, and how do we encourage people to make healthier food choices. So there are 2 main ways that we can do that. So at the top there's a blue section which is about education, and the bottom section, it is about making healthier choices more accessible and more visible. So human behaviour is controlled by 2 systems. There's a system 1 approach, which is rational, which is conscious, effortful and logical. And that takes in information, pursues goals and makes decisions. And the information that we have in the AKR sort of 2 weekly sort of goals helps us develop those habits, and Mike's striated it into sort of relatively easy, moderate and perhaps difficult, depending on who you are. So the things like eat more veg and prioritise protein and the sleep routine, these are, in my mind, really excellent examples of how we can develop our habits over time with that system 1's approach. System 2, then, once it becomes a habit, then it can move towards system 2, unconscious, effortless, impulsive, cued by feelings, associations, what we might see around us. So that's what I've just read out. Okay, so in terms of education, how can we educate people to make better choices? Well, behaviour change techniques with a theoretical evidence-based can be used to try and change dietary behaviour. So we know that self-monitoring, providing instructions and relapse prevention can improve effectiveness. So having a plan in place, this is what I'm going to eat. If I have a bad day at work and I want to snack, what are the types of snacks that I can have? Having them in the fridge, in front of you, and not having unhealthy options are going to help stick to your goals. Interestingly, government think about this on a much broader perspective rather than a sort of individual level in terms of financial incentives. How can we motivate short-term changes in dietary behaviour? And fear appeals, just to acknowledge that they don't work unless confidence is high. They actually reduce behaviour change when confidence is low. So sort of the kind of threatening, well, if you eat this, you'll get type 2 diabetes, often doesn't work, that kind of approach. And then the green choice is there. So how do we make healthy choices easier, more accessible, more visible, and reduce temptation? So the tyranny of choice, as options increase, people simplify their decision making. Size matters is really interesting, that we know that if you eat off a smaller plate, and it looks like it tells your brain a cue that you're eating a lot, for example. Also, if you just self-serve from a bowl and have a portion, because usually when you're going to eat, you've kind of got a portion in mind that you would like to eat until you're comfortably full, and then removing yourself from that food so that you don't go back and then have seconds or thirds, so then that you get to the stage where you're overeating. Over accessibility, people eat more food when foods are convenient. So that's the simple thing about putting the unhealthy products away from sort of easy reach in the kitchen. And positive associations, and children and adults too can choose foods that others around them eat, and they have appealing branding. Particularly children, I think, they are very responsive to advertising. So I picked up on that here. I was trying to think about what examples I could think of that would kind of follow this up. And Ofcom have introduced statutory regulation to make sure that children are not exposed to advertising on the TV, but that needs to be extended to like apps and YouTube, because often the adverts pop up and kids get cues there. Throughout the day, we make numerous food-related decisions. Studies confirm that food adverts, like I put up a photo of the McDonald's at the bus stop. So that's a food cue, getting just subconsciously saying to you, well, you know, is that something that you would go and eat? And is it, I think it's 99p. So you know, cost isn't a conflicting issue. Something that's interesting is the health halo effect. So if you see something with specific label, and I would even put protein in there, then some people will perceive that as being healthy. Or if you see Joe Wicks with a product holding something, or Davina McCall, so you sort of associate, well, that person looks great, that's a fitness person, they eat that, therefore I will look like them, I will be healthy like them. So there's also something called nudging or choice architecture, and that's something that supermarkets often do. So that can be for the good of the planet, like now we can only buy dolphin-friendly tuna. Okay, that wasn't the case many years ago. So supermarkets will endorse only stocking certain products for the greater good as they perceive it, but that can often work the wrong way, and that most of their buy one get one free offers are on the cakes and sweeties and chocolates, and you over purchase, and that can lead to food waste or consuming excess calories. So I mean, you never go in a supermarket and see buy a banana and get an orange free. That wouldn't. So what do we know? Healthy options should be more visible and convenient. Make nutrition information accessible, so go and look and see what you are actually eating. Exploit automatic tendencies in product design, like smaller plates or tall, thin glasses. Create positive associations, so create new associations for yourself. Like, you know, I just think that if I like some pineapple, and that would be quite an exotic kind of fruit to have, well, that's a treat. To me, that's really as nice as chocolate. So you can create new positive associations with new foods. And visually cue healthy behaviour. In terms of, I think that's a nice example. I've not seen it in our supermarkets, but that was one, it's a shopping trolley with an advert on it. I don't know if that'll maybe come to the UK in time. Let's hope so. Okay, so summary here of behaviour change, that knowledge is not really enough. We need to have an understanding of how people think about their behaviour, their beliefs, and we must understand the behaviour in order to change it. And theory can help with this and can help offer useful targets for intervention. And I suppose the key message there is that we need to develop habits. Okay, so the last 10 slides are on great food, poor diet. So in Scotland, we've got this dichotomy. We've got all the best food in the world, Scottish beef or salmon or langoustine or berries, and what do we find in the National Diet and Health Survey? That people prefer to eat the sort of Scotch pie, fish and chips and jammy donut. Okay, so how can we think about that? How can I use science to change that behavioural response? Well, I understand that food intake is governed, and this is coming back to what we started in the seminar, that two sort of paths in the brain. There's the homeostatic and hedonic. The hedonic is the reward pathway, which is you consume for pleasure, and the energostatic or homeostatic, these are just sort of similar words, is a way that the brain recognises and will send out signals to eat. Now, the really interesting thing is that it doesn't matter what size you are, whether you're lean or overweight, the body will defend its weight that it's at. So it's actually difficult to lose weight, and there's a reason for that, because the body will send out signals saying you're hungry, hungry, hungry. If you're a negative energy deficit, it will not send out really good signals saying you've eaten enough, 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 stop, stop, stop. So it's completely biased towards maintaining eating. So that is one of the key messages. So we know that we live in something called the obesogenic environment, where our sedentary lifestyle, and we have ready access to food 24 hours a day, and often low cost, high energy dense food, whether it's high in fat or high in sugar. And really, people often consume in excess of their basic nutrient and energy requirements, and that's just to maintain what we call this physiological homeostasis. Homeostasis meaning balance, energy balance. Okay, and that's difficult when there's abundance of really nice food. Eating, however, is more often or not controlled by external cues and stimuli, like time of day, and because we eat for pleasure, and that's what we call our hedonic influence. And this is not new, okay? So this is a quote from Hippocrates in the 5th century BC. This is quite funny. So obese people, those deciding to lose weight, should perform hard work before food. So he's got the concept, this is hundreds of years ago, about energy expenditure. Meals should be taken after exertion, while still panting from fatigue, and with no other refreshments before meals except wine, diluted and slightly cold. Okay, I could comply to that. Their meals should be, somebody's reading ahead of me, should be prepared with sesame or seasoning, that's interesting, and other similar substances, and be of a fatty nature, as people thus get satiated with little food. So he's got the concept of less energy intake. They should, moreover, eat only once a day, take no baths, and walk naked as long as possible. So there you go, there's the Alex Johnstone diet, just walk naked. Okay, so yeah, bestseller, I can see it now, Penguin Books, here I come. So, it's not a new problem. If I think about the treatments for obesity over the last 50 years, they haven't really changed that much, unfortunately. So these I know I'm going to whiz through just some last few slides, saying that we know that the brain has specific regions that are recognised as the reward system, and they can be activated by our favourite foods, but often through high energy foods. So that's why you get people who say that chocolate is addictive because it can light up some of the dopamine centres in the brain, but we know that food associated cues can evoke different reward neurocircuitry in the brain, and I've done some work in children, teenagers, adults and the elderly, and it's all there regardless of which age group. We know that there are signals generated during meals that can stop us to eat, and there are signals that go into the brain that tell us to continue not eating. We don't need to eat. Okay? And when we use things like MRI scans, we can see that different areas in the brain are activated, and this is looking at fed and fasted different types of food, and we can see that in the brain there are, the pointy thing's not working here, but you can see different areas in the brain are activated in the insular and striatal regions, depending on whether you're obese or lean. So people have different preferences, and they will probably learn that over time. Okay, in terms of psychology, then it was interesting that a couple of people picked up on this at the beginning. They said there's something called emotional eating, so that's the one at the bottom there. Food intake can have a remarkable effect on food, and most individuals will have their own mood and food associated habits, like for me getting a cup of coffee in the morning or eating sweet foods to reduce anxiety. There's something else called the externality theory, which was developed in the 1960s by Sacheter et al. And he said that you'll be more influenced by external to your body rather than internal cues. You may be more influenced by external cues. There's also something called disinhibition theory, which might happen if you have a binge eating episode, that you start eating maybe a box of chocolates, and instead of having 1 and 2, you sort of go on and on and on and on until the box is finished, which is not what you intended. So that can lead to sort of where you have no disinhibition to stop eating. And then the last one there at the very top is restraint, which is when you're trying to lose weight, you will be a restrained eater. You should be a restrained eater because you're trying to restrain what you're eating, you're trying to limit what you're eating calories in to try and control food intake. And there are standard questionnaires that you can apply to assess this. So here's one here. If you've put on weight, do you eat less than you usually do? How often do you refuse food or drink offered because you're concerned about your weight, or do you try to eat less at meal times than you'd like to eat? So there are lots of ways that we can sort of profile people in terms of understanding what influences their eating styles and eating patterns. And that's kind of what I think the future of nutrition is going to be, a much more stratified approach rather than having generic guidelines. So I know I've whizzed through lots of topics there. Hopefully there's something that you found really interesting. You've learned a little bit more about our physiology and psychology. And to conclude, throughout our life, our food is not just a fuel, but it really should be enjoyed through social and cultural experience. And hopefully I've convinced you that appetite is a major influence to what and when we eat, because that's what I spend a lot of time studying, and really we're all experts in food because we all do it. But we should consider really every eating episode a chance to positively influence our health. So I'll leave this up at the end. If you want to send me an email or send me a tweet, that would be great. We can keep in touch. Mari was saying about the free online course that I run. So will be running again in September and again in January on health and well-being, and that's run through the Future Learn platform. So you're more than welcome to sign up for that now, and you'll get an email reminder through Future Learn when it's starting. And then last but not least, yes, I've got loads of studies running just now at the Rowett looking at weight loss, and that's you looking at food additives, so looking at processed food. I've got the Big Breakfast study still running. I've got some studies in care homes where we're looking at the food-gut-brain axis through Alzheimer's symptoms, and also looking at prebiotics and gut health. So just to say thank you for your attention. Happy to take any questions. Thank you. Yes.
What do you think about these of like fasting on a regular basis, even like having a 12-hour fast?
So lots of the studies have been done in rodent models, animal models. So, and they suggest it's also effective not just for weight control but for lifespan as well. So for other health parameters. So I think it will be interesting. I am yet to be convinced that it is any better approach than any other weight loss regime. I would say that any weight loss regime can last for up to 6 months at a time. That's what most of the data shows, and then thereafter we tend to not stick to it because it's restrictive in some way. But things like 5-2 diet or the 18-16-8, where you eat for only 8 hours a day and fast for 16 hours, it's finding out who would suit that type of diet. Because some people will do really well on it and other people can't stick with it. And we just don't know why. So it would be nice to do more personalised nutrition or precision nutrition approaches in the future, to be able to say a questionnaire and a blood sample and say this is the type of diet that would suit you and your physiology. So
you can do that with a blood test?
Not yet. I mean, and the NHS isn't set up to do that. They're not really into lifestyle medicine, are they? They're more into preventative and treatment once you've developed a disease, whereas really what we need to do is develop a much more proactive and reactive approach to intervening much earlier. So we shouldn't be waiting till we're retired to be thinking about cardiovascular disease and other disease. I mean, you should be thinking about it much earlier. So.
You can get it done privately, can't you? I've heard about people getting blood tests and then being told
So,
what they can and can't eat.
So I think you can get blood tests done that will measure a metabolic profile. You can get blood tests done that will look at some genetic SNPs that will show you the predisposition towards certain maybe diseases. You can send your poo sample, fecal sample away and get it profiled in terms of the gut microbiota. But what I would say is that evidence is not there. What do you do with that information? Where are the papers saying if you've got this gut microbiota, this is what you should be eating. They're not there yet. So unless it's a true major gene defect where it's a hereditary condition, then yes, you can develop strategies, usually medical strategies, but nutrition alone, not so sure.
Is there any time correlation between forming bad habits or unhealthy relationships with food? Because let's face it, from the time you're born, you get a bottle shoved in your mouth, don't you, the minute you cry. So is there any kind of research around at what point that can creep into your then takes to break those habits?
So children are incredibly important. So we can reflect on some of us that were sat down at the table and you were told you're not allowed to leave the table until you finish the plate. Now, that is the worst thing you can do, because kids then don't develop a sense of their own hunger and fullness. They will only eat to what is given. So the portion size that's provided, they have to eat. So although it's annoying and frustrating sometimes as a parent when you've cooked all this food and they pick at it and eat a bit of it, and you think, well, you have to eat it because we're going out and I'm not going to be cooking food for another 4 hours. But no. So that I think we do develop. We as children are weaned by parents and are influenced by parents, and parents mean well. I mean, my mother did that as well, but it doesn't help the child develop their own sense of appetite control. So I think that's a really great example. There are other key points during puberty, during when children go to college or university or leave the home, during marriage, sort of midlife crisis. So yes, there are lots of points throughout the life course that are identified as key points in time that we either could or should change our eating habits. Yeah, good question.
Just because I'm holding this book in your hands, would you recommend a plant-based diet for the majority of the population?
So plant-based diets are probably going to be a thing in future, because if we want to maintain our planet, even on a sort of sustainability point of view, we will not be able to produce enough animal-based source of protein to feed the whole planet. So that will mean undoubtedly that we will have to move to plant-based source of protein. So there's a lot of interest in plant-based source of protein because they're more environmentally friendly with reference to greenhouse gas emissions than animal sources. So as a basic example, if you're not familiar with this concept, then cows eat grass, they ruminate and produce methane gas. Methane gas is one of the greenhouse gases that impact on the ozone layer, which causes climate change. So I think, and we're reliant on cows for beef and milk. So that's just one example where I think plant-based diets have a role, and I don't think that everybody's going to go vegetarian or vegan. I think that's highly unlikely. Only 5% of the UK population are vegetarian. So I think what the food sector is interested in is reformulation and new product development, where we can reduce the amount of animal-based protein and substitute in plant-based sources of protein. So when you get a burger, it might not be a full beef burger, it might have pea protein in it, for example. I also think that plant protein and plant sources, of protein are interesting because they're a really rich source of polyphenols and fibre. So I think they also can give other health benefits. Yeah.
Alex, what's your thoughts on digestive aids for gut health?
It's not something I would say that I'm an expert in. But yes, I'm aware that some people will take enzymes to help, purportedly, help digestion and or absorption. I mean, I can do a little bit more research, but I am a bit sceptical about whether they are effective. But then if somebody says to me, well, I found that I feel better taking them, then as long as they do no harm, then who am I to say that, well, I'm not so sure that that's effective, but not that I'm aware of, no. I think one which is linked to this is this sort of alkaline diet. Now that is a pile of tosh, because the body is very good at pH balance, so if not, we've been in the hospital, so yeah.
Similar to that, can you talk a bit about like food insensitivities? Jen mentioned like tests for food allergies.
Yes.
So where would you start with someone who maybe believes that some food is causing a problem for them?
Yeah.
And what's the evidence for some of that?
Okay, there was a really good discussion on this on the Association for Nutrition Facebook page. And the consensus is that you should speak to a dietitian who are dealing with, dietitians are trained to deal with food allergies. So the grey areas, if you have a food intolerance or a food sensitivity, that is very difficult to test because there are maybe no clinical biomarkers to test for that, other than if you keep a food diary and you have symptoms when you eat that, then that and alone kind of is evidence enough for you perhaps to avoid eating that particular food or food group. So the problem is, how can you diagnose it? We can't really, unless there are specific biomarkers, clinical biomarkers that can be done in a hospital lab, then you can't diagnose it.
So would you suggest, like, for people who might suspect like an elimination type diet sort of thing, like are they?
So that's something that would need to be done with a dietitian, because it's actually quite difficult to do a proper elimination diet. It's very restrictive, and you wouldn't want to just embark on that without proper professional advice.
Is there ways of reversing food sensitivity?
So there's some interesting papers showing that kids can be helped develop insensitivity to things like peanut allergies by small doses of peanuts. So in some cases, yes, but other cases, no, if you are allergic. And interestingly, some of the food allergies come in clusters. So if you're allergic to shellfish, you'll also be allergic to other products as well. So.
What's your thoughts on all the insects and proteins?
That's my thought.
I've heard so much about
I mean, our UK culture is not very amenable to insect protein. Like, I don't think we're going to be sitting eating crickets, no, instead of crisps. But you can see, when I go away, I can see fruit bars, that have got insect protein in it. And you wouldn't really know it was there, but for me it's just the thought of it, so
Did you say your big breakfast diet is looking at the timing of eating?
yes,
every day?
that's
Is that showing up?
So the reason why I'm interested in that is there was some published literature in Spain and Israel that showed that when they fed overweight women a big breakfast and a small dinner, they lost a lot more weight, even though when they fed them the same calories as a small breakfast and a big dinner, they still lost more weight. So it's isocaloric diet. So diet 1, diet 2, they still lost more weight on the big breakfast, small dinner. Yes. Now that's really interesting. Now why is that? That is the question that I asked. Is it because it's linked with circadian rhythm, that we know there are natural rhythms in the body related to daylight, and that the energy utilisation may be different at different times of the day? Okay, that's one thought. The other thought is behavioural. What do you do when you have a big Christmas meal afterwards? Go and collapse on the sofa, yeah. So when do we eat our big meal in the evening in the UK? We don't tend to eat big breakfast. You just go and collapse on the sofa. So it might be behavioural, or it might actually be physiological, it might be a little bit of both. So that's what I'm looking at just now. So is to try and tease out the mechanisms for why that might be. And the energy can't be lost, it has to go somewhere. You know, energy cannot be created or destroyed. It has to be transformed from one form into the other.
And did they track energy expenditure in that study?
Yes.
Was it matched?
Yes. Interestingly.
And so when will you finish your study?
End of this year. I've just finished one study that I presented in Glasgow a couple of weeks ago, and what we found was, I said in that study, this is one of my Scottish Government funded studies, I said the big breakfast is good, let's feed a high protein breakfast or a high fibre breakfast and let's see what happens. They were fed for 4 weeks on one diet, 4 weeks on the other diet. And that's when I was discussing, is a calorie a calorie? And in fact, it is. If you are in a negative energy balance, you will lose weight. They lost exactly the same amount of weight between the two diets because we gave them their food. The really interesting thing is that they were more satiated on the high protein diet. So they didn't feel hungry, they felt more hungry on the high fibre diet. But that's just a preliminary quick look-see of the data. There'll be other markers like cholesterol, glucose, and what happens with fecal samples that I want to have a look at. But initially, yes, it's really interesting in terms of what you eat also and when you eat.
What's the most surprising thing you found in all the research you've done?
Oh, that's a good question. I think people, because I've worked so much for so long on protein, the top 10 sources of protein are number 1 poultry, number 2 meat products, and the only look-in of plant protein in the UK is baked beans. So we're not very good at eating plant protein. But that just gives, you know, opportunity for me to work with companies and make some suggestions how they can incorporate that.
That's most popular to least popular, is that what you mean?
Mm-hmm. And what we also know is that even although people do have health conditions, they're not automatically choosing healthy products when they go shopping. So education, that's why I said education is really part of it, but then you need to develop the habits, behaviour.
Where do you think that education should happen? Should it be like in schools or?
It has to be across different sectors. Like I've worked a lot in the workplaces looking at stress, so I think you can modulate stress and then you'll improve nutrition. So it's not always improve nutrition, you modulate stress, it can be feed forward and feed back. So I think, yes, schools, it should be a whole school approach, it should be teachers, kids and parents, caterers. I think so across the workplace we should have workplace health initiatives that encourage people to take a break, drink water, walk about, healthy food provision, subsidised, you know. I mean, there's such a culture shift to what we have now. We have now, you know, work as hard as you can, head down and, you know, grab a sandwich. You know, we don't tend to eat much, you know, the UK, 40% of us skip breakfast, don't eat breakfast at all. So we have no fuel to work on when we get to work. So children included, which is quite sad. So
Why do you think it's got to this point?
I think our culture has changed, and you know, working mums as well, the role of the mum as the main gatekeeper for food has changed, and that mums are not standing at home doing the washing and cooking, and that they have multiple roles and time is often limited. That's not a bad thing, that can be a really good thing, but certainly, you know, that's just one example I can reflect in terms of what the family structure is like. We're never away from our phones, don't even look at our food sometimes. You know, I'll put my food down and Nicholas is like, oh, I want to look at the iPad. And I don't want you to look at the iPad, I want you to look at the food. I want you to get all those cues going in your brain. Do you know what I mean? So technology, working life, you know, it's just such a different lifestyle. And you know, our supermarkets are now open. I still remember when supermarkets were closed on a Sunday and they were only open between like 9 and 5 or something like that. We've now got 24-hour access to food. When you go into the supermarkets We're bombarded by an array of foods. I also remember when it was ski yogurt or no yogurt, and it was club biscuits and penguin biscuits, and that was it. It's like food choice is just unbelievable. So yeah, that sounds maybe a bit old-fashioned, but you know, the whole eating culture has changed, and our physiology hasn't changed. We're still the same human beings. We still have our basic genetic profile, so we can't blame obesity in our genes. So, not in the last 50 years.
So true, you never see fruit and veg on buy one get one free.
No.
That's right enough. Only ever chocolate and crisps.
Like why can I in my workplace can I not ask for a half portion of? It's like I don't really want a whole portion. It's food waste. I can't get that. Why can I not have? Okay, today's healthy option is this, and it's reduced to £1.50 a portion. You would see all students queuing at the university to buy it. Do you know what I mean? There are ways that you can get people to change their eating habits in the workplace environment, but that requires buy-in from the employer as well. So.
Have you done any research on the eat less and often approach as well?
It's because I've been really interested in meal timing. It's something I have read about, and that we know, and that in the old papers, you know, say, you know, what they've done is fed people 6 times a day versus 3 times a day, and looked at energy expenditure or energy metabolism. They didn't detect any change between the 6 or 3, and the sort of conclusion to that is that do whatever suits your lifestyle better. So some people are nibblers and they prefer small meals or throughout the day, or grazers. And then some people are more sort of binge eaters that don't eat, and they can go the whole day without eating much and then eat a vast amount of calories in a 4-hour period. What I would say is there's an awful lot of evidence that late time eating is not good for outcomes. So observational studies, epidemiological studies will always say that breakfast eaters have a lower BMI than non-breakfast eaters. But it might be that people who eat breakfast are also physically active. So there's a lot of confounders in that. So.
And what would you consider as late? Like after?
Well, that is a really good question, because some of the studies in Spain, right? So if you think about Spanish eating, they have tapas in the evening. Tapas is small plates. So they go out for dinner at 9 o'clock, right? But they also, after they have a huge lunch with red wine and everything, go home for a siesta. They do. So their eating habits are so removed from what our work culture is like. So yes, it does depend on sort of culture in terms of what's late night. But yes, after 8 p.m. is usually kind of 8 till 8 is sort of the rough sort of 12-hour sort of day that we look at.
From your research in the last few years, what changes have you done to your own diet?
Well, I mean, I will openly say I'm vegetarian, but that's been for the last many years. I used to be flexitarian. I used to have predominantly plant-based, but I used to eat. So I haven't eaten red meat for a long time. I used to eat fish, and then I just one day decided that I didn't really want to eat fish anymore. So, but that's just my preference. So.
You've not found anything from your research that made you think about it for your own diet?
Well, I do try and eat breakfast. So I'm not the kind of person who eats breakfast absolutely within 3 minutes of jumping out of my bed. But I always have my food kind of with me to take with me to work. And I think people who habitually eat the same day in, day out, as boring as it sounds, are better at controlling body weight. So you've seen, well, if you follow me on Instagram or Facebook, you'll see my soup in my bun every day, because I like that.
But you almost force yourself to have breakfast?
No, well, sometimes, but maybe initially, but if you have a really small evening meal, when you wake up in the morning, I will guarantee you'll be hungry. So it's a catch-22. Often people will say to me, "Oh, I don't feel hungry, Alex." And I'm like, no, just cut back calories before you go to bed, and you will feel hungry. You'll be wanting to eat something.
Are the results, so you're
That is a really good question. So a lot of my work I've done has only been on men because they're much easier to get to stick to a diet, and I don't have to worry about menstrual cycle. And we do see differences between men and women, like in gut transit time. And women often have, men often, this is very generalised, see food as fuels. They find it quite easy to stick to diets, whereas women have other habits that they think, well, I need this, that and other. If anyone's interested in any of the papers I've got, some of them are written as chatty reviews. They're not all hardcore science papers. So I'm happy to share them if I can. Yeah. But I think definitely what we call phenotype or gender are going to be a huge growth area in the future in terms of designing diets for specific ages and specific genders. So, yeah. Like ageing. So ageing is something I can see that I'm working on just now, that when I'm working in the food industry, I'll say, why do we, when we go in the supermarket, we never see any products that are targeted towards supporting healthy ageing? And then how would we do that? So, if I saw a product and it had a picture for targeted over 40, right, and it was high protein, and it had a picture of a woman with white hair, now, I wouldn't buy that. It's like, I don't look like that, So it's difficult though. How are you going to market that? But the knowledge is there how to prepare food and beverages, but then how do we market that with a health message that consumers can relate to? So I think that's going to be, well, maybe in the next 10 years you'll see targeted products.
What's your opinion on trying to get them to move to putting calories in all the restaurants and things like that?
I think it's great, but when I speak to restaurateurs, they're like, oh no, people want to eat out and they want to have their steak and chips and just enjoy it in peace without being bombarded with all the nutritional information. But the likes of me, when I eat out, I want to try something new that I wouldn't necessarily cook, but is also healthy. So my requirements for eating out are, I sometimes feel I'm completely abnormal, that I do want to know what's in the food. So I am in the camp of, I think it's a good thing. I think you can...
Like a smoker who doesn't want to read the
Uh-huh.
health concerns.
Uh-huh.
They call it active information avoidance.
Yeah.
Where you know it's bad for you, so
Uh-huh.
you're just not, I don't want to know about it.
But if I did want a piece of, creme brulee is my favourite, why couldn't I order a small taster size? I don't need a bowl this size, do you know what I mean? Why can't I order a taster size? That would be enough.
I think that's half the problem is the
Uh-huh.
portion
Yes.
sizes.
Uh-huh.
It's really good now that a lot of restaurants bring in the smaller sizes, which
Uh-huh.
used to be the pensioner portions.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
Recent words like anyways.
Uh-huh.
But it does make that, I think it does definitely
Uh-huh.
make a difference. But it's also surprising as well sometimes when you do get the calories and think, oh my goodness.
Yes,
And
it's
you
like...
think something could be this size
Uh-huh.
and really calorific. And
Yes. Uh-huh.
Yeah, we did a recent trip to Florida and they've started putting calories on every menu and
Mhm.
it made a massive difference to the choices we made.
Oh, really?
Really, yeah,
Yeah.
big time.
Mhm.
Some of the dishes were over 50 calories.
Yes.
Just the main dishes.
Mhm.
That made a massive difference to what we chose.
Mhm.
Highlighting portion size is also, from a calorie perspective, to restaurateurs won't be a bad thing either.
Yes. But they have to see that they will be driven by consumers and consumer choice. So consumers need to be asking for information, in my opinion.
Done.
So when do you start the AKR study?
Whenever you want, yeah.